Well, good morning again, everybody. So glad you're here. We are, like Allison said, in the final week of our series called The Way Out is Through. And throughout these last 4 weeks, we've been talking about those moments that occur in our lives that we wish would have never happened. Those moments that knock the wind out of our sails, that punch us in the stomach, that knock us off of our equilibrium where we don't know where up, down, left, or right actually is. Those moments that we would think, oh, life would have been so much better, life would be so much easier if this wouldn't have happened. Yes, we're diving into those moments throughout this series. And throughout this series, we've talked a lot about this disturbing promise that Jesus made us. I mean, Jesus gives us lots of promises that make us feel warm and fuzzy and secure in a lot of ways, but he also promises us a disturbing promise in John 16:33. He says, "In this life you will have troubles." That is a promise from Jesus. In this life, you will have troubles. Life will not go the way that you plan. The story will not go the way that you wish it was written. It is a promise from Jesus. And there's this fallacy that hangs around religion a lot. This is the fallacy. If you follow the rules, if you listen to what's in the old book, if you listen to what the guy or the girl on the stage at the church tell you, if you do those things, life will be peachy. And we've said that that is just not the way that life works. God is bigger than any formula any religious man or woman could tell you. He's bigger than that. And there's mystery to it. And throughout this series, we've talked about how can we go through our challenging seasons of life, those hurtful things that happen. How can we go through them and not just be bitter on the other side, but how can we go through them and become better? And throughout the series, we've put this graphic up over and over again to explain that faith is actually a journey. Following Jesus is actually a journey. It's not like you say yes to Jesus, you get baptized, and then life is just perfect. It's a journey. And it actually starts with a type of faith called confident faith. This is a faith where you feel like you just feel God's presence all the time. Whenever someone's giving a message, you feel like they're reading your mail. Every song that we sing in church, you just love, and you never complain about the volume of the drums. Some of you guys, that's like such a long time ago for you. When you pray, you feel like God listens to you, hears you. When you follow through on what you're supposed to do, you feel like God blesses you. I mean, it's that confident faith season at the very beginning of your life. But the reality is that we don't stay there. We move into a challenged faith season when life is hard, where you start to have questions and doubts and fears creep in. You don't feel God's presence the way that you did at church camp. You don't feel God's presence the way that you used to. And you just think, oh man, if I could just go back to that earlier season of faith, then life would be easier. Challenged faith season. Maybe for you, you find yourself in this challenged faith season right now. Maybe it's some things with you, between you and God, and some doubts and questions you have, but more often than not, it's these external factors that play into it, the experiences that we have in life that just don't make sense, that leave us with hurt and pain and suffering, and you're wondering, God, where are you in this? I can imagine over the last 7 months, we've all been in this challenged faith season one way or another, because of our great friend COVID. We've all been wondering, God, how much longer is this going to be? When's normal going to happen again? And what is going on? And we've all been there in many different ways, with so many of our plans being canceled and having to pivot and reschedule over and over and over again. Many of us find ourselves in this challenged faith season. But throughout the series, we've talked about the beautiful invitation of Jesus is not to go around or to medicate ourselves or have a crutch so that we go around our challenged faith season. The invitation of Jesus is to go right through it, to walk through our challenging seasons, to walk directly, looking it in the eyes with courage and bravery to say, God, what do you want to do in me through this season? And so each week we've talked about different tools that we can have in our toolbox. So as we walk through the challenging seasons, we can become who God wanted us to be and go right through it with bravery. The first week in the series, we talked about when we hit those seasons of life that are so hard and challenging, we don't need to just give God our polite prayers. We don't need to just act all prim and proper with our Heavenly Father. God actually invites us to cry out to Him, to lament, to yell at Him, to be real with Him. And so the invitation of our good Heavenly Father is to just tell Him the truth and be real with Him. And then the second week of the series, we talked about the importance of what we carry and what we let go of when we go through these challenged faith seasons. So often we pick up and we carry lesser things, crutches, things to medicate us so that we feel like we can get through these seasons, but they're lesser things. They're not the real thing. It's like Diet Coke. Yeah, I just trashed Diet Coke in front of you guys. I know I lost half of you guys in that moment, but it's just not the real thing. It's not the real high fructose corn syrup or whatever. Wow, I really went on a little Diet Coke rant there. Sorry about that. But we hold on these lesser things, and God is inviting us to hold on to the true things, the things that never change, hold on to God's presence, and to hold on to God's people, the people around us that can lift our eyes when we can't seem to lift our own head. Last week we talked, it was a real happy-go-lucky talk. We talked about suffering. We talked about those things that happen in your life that there's just no great explanation for. And we don't believe that God sent it to us, but we do somehow have to believe that God allowed it to happen. And in those seasons where there's devastation and suffering, learning that we can look at it with a certain lens so that we can see the bigger picture. We can look at it with a certain lens, asking God what he wants to grow in us, to mature us. And this week, in a sequel to last week, talking happy-go-lucky about suffering, this morning I would love to land the plane in this series talking about what we should do with our pain. What should we do with the aches, the pain, the hurts that we just accumulate through this messy journey called life? What can we do with our pain? I read this quote years ago from a Franciscan priest by the name of Richard Rohr, and it stopped me in my tracks. I don't even remember the rest of the book because this was so impactful to me. Richard Rohr says this. He said, pain and suffering that is not transformed is transmitted. Pain and suffering that we don't give to God for him to change, for us to do the work in the middle of, pain and suffering, it's not transformed, it's going to be transmitted. And in newsflash, it's going to be transmitted in ways that you don't want it to be transmitted. Not to your enemy, it's going to be transmitted to your friends, your spouse, your kids, your grandkids, your coworkers, your boss. Pain and suffering that is not transformed is transmitted. This is just a law of the universe. I wish this wasn't true, but it's just the way it is. One way this happens is just in this simple sense that hurt people tend to hurt people. You ever run into somebody at a grocery store and they're just irate about something and they're being so rude, throwing a huge fit about something, and at first you're just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this person, they're so immature, or what are they smoking, what is going on? But later you think to yourself, something's going on in their life. Like, who hurt them that they would think that was an appropriate way to act? And we can point the magnifying glass on ourselves as well. When we're in a season when somebody had hurt our feelings, somebody had betrayed us, where we feel like we've gotten the shaft at work or at home, and we're just sort of walking around bitter, it's so easy for someone just to knock us a little bit, and it feels like we explode on them because hurt people. Hurt that's not transformed will be transmitted. Another way that this happens is in just generational hurt. It's not a happy thought to think of, but we wound our families one way or another. And half of the battle of the wounding in our families is recognizing that we will and owning what we do to our family members, right? I mean, your mom and dad, as much as they loved you, there are things that happened that they had hurt in their life that was transmitted to you, and it was translated in different ways in your life. And probably from them, it was from their parents, your grandparents, and generation after generation after generation. Because unresolved, untransformed hurt, man, it will not stay with you. It will be transmitted to the people that you love. And in this really strange, mysterious, and annoying way, pain is so powerful because not only will it be transmitted to others, but it actually has this odd, strange self-focusing way about it to where we can only end up thinking about ourselves when we're in pain. I heard somebody say, try thinking about your neighbor who's in need when you dropped a hammer on your toe. Or in my vernacular right now, try thinking about how great Jack's tower that he built just was when you step on a Lego. I mean, it's hard to think beyond yourself when you're in pain. Pain is this mysterious, powerful, sometimes destructive, sometimes instructional thing that happens to us, to where it makes us only focus on ourselves, but we're spilling our hurt and our pain on everybody around us if we don't deal with it. So the question I want to tackle this morning is, how do we transform our pain? What do we do with the cuts, the scrapes, the bruises, the scars that we just occur to us throughout this messy journey of life? How do we have it transformed by God? And so I want just to start here, just to recap where we've been in this series. We've been hanging out in the Old Testament about 6,000 years before Jesus came on the scene with God's chosen nation, the nation of Israel. Now, the Israelites, they were enslaved by the Egyptian empire, Pharaoh, the pyramids, that whole thing. They're enslaved for 430 years. God hears their cry and says that I'm going to set you free from slavery, but I'm not just going to set you free. I'm going to give you your own land, a promised land, flowing of milk and honey. He says, so God raises up Moses and his brother Aaron and other leaders to set them free from slavery. Then they get on this road to the promised land, but it's like the signal went bad and they're having a hard time getting the GPS working. And so they don't go directly to the promised land. They actually wander in the desert for 40 years. 40 years of wandering in the desert looking for the promised land. And right when they get to the precipice of this promised land from their heavenly Father, their leader Moses dies. And there's a change of guard in leadership. So this is where I want to pick up this morning. I want us to be introduced to the change of guard in leadership. As God's people, they were traveling through and struggling through this desert season, the challenge part of their life, until they get right here. This is Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. After the death of Moses, the old leader, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. This is the promise. I will give you every place you set your foot, as I promised Moses. He's calling back to that promise. He says, I know you've been in this season where life is so hard, and it's so hard for you to believe that there's even light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm coming through on my promise I made to Moses. He continues on. God says this, your territory will extend to the desert, to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, this is so beautiful, don't miss this, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. They finally made it. They went from that confident faith through the desert season challenge faith, and they're finally there at their arrival place. They finally made it. Through all the pain, all the leadership decisions, all the hurt, all the brokenness, all of the years of suffering, they finally made it. But they had to go through the desert to actually get there. They couldn't go around it. And you might be asking yourself, you might be saying this like, oh, that's really great for the Israelites. They finally made it to the promised land. But, I don't know if I see light at the end of the tunnel in my story. And I don't know if I even believe that there's light at the end of the tunnel in my story. And I feel stuck, questioning, doubtful that God even cares about me. That whole never leave him or forsake him stuff, I feel pretty forsaken right now. What am I supposed to do with my pain? What am I supposed to do with my pain? Well, I'm so glad that you asked that very important question this morning, you guys. Because what I want to do is I want to take us 6,000 years forward from them receiving the promised land into the time of the New Testament, where Jesus had lived, he had died, and 3 days later he miraculously rose from the dead, conquering sin and death. And then he hung out for about 40 days, went back up to sit at the right hand of God the Father, and he set out his followers on this mission to tell everybody about what he had done. And this is where we come face to face with this guy named Paul. We talk about Paul a lot because he actually authored about 2/3 of our New Testament scriptures. But Paul had an interesting beginning to his story. If you think everything inside of this book is nice, prim, proper, and like God just took somebody's hand and went like that, and that's how we got the scriptures, man, I've got some beautiful news for you. Paul was a guy, when we meet Paul, he hated Christianity. He hated Christians. He was doing everything he possibly could to stop the Christian movement once and for all. But then Jesus got a hold of his life. He met the resurrected Christ, and it changed everything for him. He went from one of the biggest persecutors of the church to being the main proponent of the church of Jesus. And he went everywhere in the world where they hadn't even heard about Jesus yet, saying that you guys are missing out. You're worshiping the wrong God. This is the living God who conquered death. Caesar is not the real Lord. Jesus is the real Lord. And he went around writing to churches and starting churches and spreading this message to people that had never heard it before. And we're going to look at one of those letters this morning. The beginning of the letter, for us in our Bible, it's called 2 Corinthians. It's the second letter that he wrote to a church in this place called Corinth. And in the beginning of this, I don't want us to just look at this like Bible verses. I think sometimes we get so inoculated, like we're looking at Bible verses or memory verses. In this, we're going to see an eyewitness account of how somebody had their pain transformed. We're going to see someone who walked with Jesus, and he's going to explain to the church that received this letter, to our church this morning, how we can actually have our pain transformed so it's not transmitted, so we can look at it in a certain way that it can be like it can bring life into the world. And that's what I'm interested in this morning. So let's look at this account of what Paul said at the beginning of this letter about how our pain can be transformed if we allow God into it. Paul writes at the beginning of 2 Corinthians, I believe starting in verse 2, he says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our troubles." And then he says, "So that." So often we don't think that there's any reason outside of why God comforts us when we're in trouble or we feel pain and suffering. We think he does that because he's a good father. And yes, that's true. He is a good father who does comfort us because, as the passage says, as Paul's writing, he's the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. But he's putting this little phrase there, so that, like there's a reason why he comforts us. And if it was just me, I would fill this sentence out with, so that, like, I get relief, right? Like, that's why God comforts me, so that I can get relief. Or God comforts me so I don't feel bad anymore, so I don't have to go through the pain that I'm going through anymore. That's this after the so that. This is why God comforts me, so that I can get relief. I'm just like you, man. Like, I turn it back to me as quickly as I possibly can. And the one thing that I want when I'm in the middle of a season that I don't want to go through is I want somebody to push the eject button. And that's how I think Paul's going to finish this sentence. But it's kind of discouraging, and maybe it's going to rub you the wrong way. But Paul pulls back the curtain a little bit, and he lets us see something bigger, because the so that is bigger than we could ever possibly imagine. He says this next. He says, "The compassion and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our trouble, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." Maybe one of the reasons Paul is saying that we have gone through hard times, gone through pain, and we've received comfort is so that we can turn that around and bring hope and light and life and comfort and relief to those who are going through the exact same thing. He's encouraging us to lean into this possibility that he believes to be true, that we can find purpose in our pain if we help others find hope the way that we did. We help others experience hope the way that he did. We're comforted so that we can be a comfort for others. And this is one way that Jesus transforms our pain so we don't transmit it. He continues on in the next verse and he says this, "For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ." In other words, he's being real. He's like, man, we have shared abundantly in the sufferings of Christ. In our modern vernacular, life has been hard. And what we've been doing, working for Jesus, working for this mission, man, it has led to lots of hard stuff, lots of pain, lots of suffering. But he continues on, he says, so also this comfort abounds through Christ. It's almost like we're able to have more of an impact because of this severe suffering that we've had. Like, the harder you hit us, the more impact we can have to share hope to others. And this hope and this comfort that comes through Christ, through us to other people, it's like it can be stronger than we could ever imagine if we were just hurt a little bit. I think this is so true because we understand this, right, in just our modern world, that, there are people, when we go through hard times, when we're in the middle of what we feel like is hell, and we have somebody come up to us with good intentions, and we don't know them very well, and they just look at you and they go, "I know exactly how you feel." And we want to be like, "No, you don't, Karen. Like, you don't know how I feel at all." That was just a random generated name there, by the way. I don't know if there's any Karens in the room with us this morning. But we want to say, "You don't know." And that's frustrating, and they're well-intentioned in that, and they don't know what to say, so they just say that. But the reality is, when somebody comes up to us, though, that we know has been to hell and back and stopped halfway at a rest stop in the middle, Man, when they look us in the eyes and they say, oh, I know, me too, I've been there. Oh man, it means so much more to us, doesn't it? We want to sit at their feet. We want to learn from them like they're a sage. Tell me how you got through this. And they speak those powerful words C.S. Lewis said about 100 years ago. The two most powerful words in the English language is me too. I've been there. Me too. And it's like where the sufferings abound, there's comfort and impact of the comfort that also abounds. He continues on and he helps us see again, he tries to make this so clear that there is a purpose behind the pain that we experience, and it's for other people. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and your salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance, stick-to-itness, grit of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm because we know that just as you share in our suffering, so also you share in our comfort. Paul understands that when we're in the middle of pain, we can't really see much in front of us. Everything's blurry because of the pain and the synapses that are firing in our brain. Everything's blurry, and Paul's wanting to give us perspective here. He's going to tell us why we go through the pain that we go through sometimes and why God allows it. And he says you just don't have the right perspective. You're not seeing that it's for other people, that it can be used for other people. I think of it this way. You can have an 85-inch OLED 4K, 8K TV, and the most incredible, pristine picture to watch the Colts on Sundays. I mean, you can have this incredible screen, but if you have your nose right up against the screen and you can't see the forest for the trees and you're just looking at blurred, pixelated images, sometimes that's our image when we're in pain. We just don't see things clearly. We don't see end to end where the story's going. And Paul is saying, take a step back, take another step back, take 3, 4 steps back, and you get a perfect picture. This is how God sees our pain and our stories. And he sees that there's purpose that can be brought from the darkest moments of our life. See, if we're distressed, it was for your comfort. If we were comforted, it is for your comfort, he says, and it builds something in us. Paul continues on, and I love this next passage because this is so real and raw because he doesn't have any rainbows or butterflies about what he had experienced. He says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. This is Paul, one of the leaders in the early church, the author of 2/3 of our New Testament, throwing it out there that he had suicidal ideation. He despaired for life itself. Now, can I walk over here, just step on a soapbox just for a moment? For far too long, the church of Jesus, religion in America and probably across the world, has not spoken about mental health and the effects of mental health and anxiety, stress, suicidal thoughts. And here we have an example of the guy who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, who's thrown it out there that he despaired for life itself. He thought he had his death sentence. If you've ever been in a religious circle where you felt shame for what was going on in your head and you had things that you couldn't process on your own, I just want to sincerely say, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry you were made to feel that way. And I can just speak for our little corner of the kingdom here at Bridgeway, that, man, God cares about your whole health, your spiritual health, your emotional health, your mental health. And he wants you to thrive in every way. So if medication helps you, go for it. If counseling helps you, if therapy helps you, it's been one of the greatest gifts of God in my life, then go for it. And we will come alongside you because we've all got our own messes. And here's Paul saying that life was so hard that he even thought about death often and just ending it. Don't feel shame because of it. Stepping back off of my soapbox. But I want to let you know, Paul's not sugarcoating it here. He was in a deep depression and a dark place because of this. But he points us to this bigger perspective, and he says this in the very next verse. He says, but this happened. All those hard things happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. And I don't know how this verse hits you. I can imagine for some of you, this sounds ridiculous, and you're like angry that this is in the Bible. And you're like, this is absurd. Like to actually look at the hard things like God was wanting to do something so we'd rely on him. Maybe you're like that. And that's okay. We have space here for wherever you are. But I also, there are people that hear this and they're like, yes, this is exactly where I was. I felt this exact thing. The death of a loved one, the death of a child, of a spouse, of a parent, cancer, divorce. When people feel like there is nothing else for them, they have no solid ground around them, they find in that moment that God's presence has never been nearer. And they find in that moment that they can rely on him in ways that they never could when life was amazing. And this verse is so real to them. And this verse points them to the reality that this is the God who raises the dead, who's going to bring good out of the darkest, most evil things ever possible. But this happens so that we might not rely on ourselves. And this is what the reality was. And then Paul, he finishes this passage. I love what he says here. Just to get a little grammar nerd on you. I won't go too deep into this because I'll lose half the church over this. But he says this at the end. He says, he has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us as you help us by your prayers. You notice that all three of the verb tenses are in this verse. All three of them. He looks back on the past. He says, he has delivered us from such deadly peril. And he says, he will deliver us again looking into the future. He can believe in the future because of what he experienced in the past. He says, on that we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us in the present tense. It's this strong, gritty, real living faith that was developed in Paul because of what he's seen in his past. Oh, what a great challenge for us this morning. What a great challenge for us this morning. Paul, he's reminding us, he's encouraging us, he's inviting us to believe that our pain can be transformed when we allow God to use it for the good of others. One way that God transforms our pain is if we open up and we're vulnerable enough and we let God use it for the healing and the comfort of other people. Now, there's lots of different Bible verses I could go to on this, but I thought maybe the most powerful way to do it is to show you a modern real-life example. The story of Rachel Beckwith, who shows us so much, and her mother shows us so much about what God can bring that's beautiful out of the darkest moments. So check out this video.
Samantha Paul was supposed to be planning her daughter's birthday party. Instead, she was in Tigray, Ethiopia, pumping water from the wells built in Rachel's memory, the dream her little girl never got the chance to see come true.
She wouldn't believe it. She'd be like awestruck.
Rachel Beckwith had heard there were kids in Africa that did not have clean water, so she made just one wish for her 9th birthday.
No party, no big presents, just wanted to have people donate to her charity water campaign.
She would give up so much, and yet she was robbed of so much.
Robbed of her life in a car accident just a few weeks later. The story of her birthday sacrifice quickly spread. Rachel's cause eventually raised nearly $1.3 million, enough to build wells in 149 communities in Ethiopia, places where children used to walk for hours to collect water. Water often filled with leeches, dirt, and disease. A year after losing Rachel, Samantha visited the new wells. She tasted the water and met the families touched by her daughter's dream.
I always knew that she was special. It's amazing that now other people can feel how special she was.
And Rachel was everywhere, smiling on a marble plaque in a park, adorning an altar at a church.
Everybody in the countryside knew about this 9-year-old girl from Seattle, Washington, that cared about them.
The villagers sang of Rachel, prayed for Rachel. One mother told Samantha she had a daughter of her own. She was telling her Rachel's story to teach the true meaning of compassion.
I really miss Rachel, and I wish that she could still be here, especially to see all the kids and the people that are going to benefit from her wish.
I cannot begin to fathom the pain and the loss that Rachel's mother experienced, and the anger and the confusion. I can't begin to fathom it. But I also can't begin to fathom the joy, the kind of joy that's so deep that you have to go through hell to get to the other side of experiencing being in Ethiopia, meeting people across the globe that her daughter's compassion and her story is now breathing life into places where there were just death sentences everywhere. And she's not, all rainbows and butterflies. I mean, she talked about how much she missed her, but she's just continually moved and continually reminded of her presence through her heart of compassion. My friends, that is pain that's transformed and changed. You might have heard of Rick Warren before. Rick Warren is a pastor and an author in Southern California. He wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, which is the second highest selling book of all time next to the Bible. So it's a pretty popular book. 2013, they came home and their teenage son had committed suicide after he hit a wave of despair. He shot himself. And after Rick and his wife Kay sort of disappeared for a while to grieve and mourn, they came back into the public arena, and they have a huge platform as church leaders. And what they really wanted to talk about was how churches need to stop being silent about depression and suicidal ideation and anxiety. They need to be on the front lines of saying it's okay not to be okay. Let's walk forward together. And man, they've made trainings and conferences that have just impacted my life a lot just in these last couple years. That is pain that's transformed. Rick Warren actually said this years later. It's so powerful. He said that your greatest impact will flow from your deepest pain. Your deepest service to this world, you guys, will flow from your deepest pain. People might be impressed by your skills. They might be, swooned by your pedigree, your resume. Oh man, but they will connect with your deep pain in ways that those things never could. So the question for you, the question for me is, how will we offer up our pain to God, our darkest moments, so that Jesus can bring light through them to other people? That's the invitation. That's the invitation. Not to waste your hurt or your pain, but say, God, how can this somehow bring comfort and rescue and light and life and hope to somebody else who's gone through this same thing? And I don't have that answer for you, but I can just imagine the wheels starting to turn in your heads. Maybe for you it was infertility, the loss of a child, the struggle to become pregnant. Maybe for you it was some sort of abuse. Maybe for you it was just feeling left alone as a teenager or as a kid, and you can be somebody who could be a mentor to love and care on the next generation. Maybe for you, you're an entrepreneur and you know God's wired your mind this way and you can help other kids think in entrepreneurial ways. Maybe you just there's so many ways that you can use some of your harder times, your darker times for others. I want to close this morning. I'll show you this picture. This is exactly where you assume I'm going. This is a Navajo Native American rug. And I read about this years ago. The Navajo Native Americans, they such artists with these things, right? I mean, there's meticulous, the design, the symmetry. This is in black and white, but the colors are so vibrant in so many ways. And they're just beautiful pieces of art, and they're so warm. This has just been a tradition for generations in this tribe to do this. And I read once, somebody asked them, or they looked at, the design of them, and you realize that a lot of times on the traditional Navajo rugs, there's one part of it that's blemished. There's one part of it that's not finished, that looks rough compared to the rest of it, one corner of the rug. And so somebody asked this rug maker, this artisan, asked them, why do you leave the blemish? Why do you leave the bruise on the apple, if you will? And this Native American artisan said, oh, the blemish is where the Spirit gets in. The blemish is where the Spirit gets in. Now, we can go round and round theologically, Christian, Native American theology, but I think that they're dead on with this. The blemish is where the Spirit does its best work. The bruise is where God is doing the best work. Your brokenness, your pain, your hurt, your darkest moment is where God gets in and brings something beautiful out of. That's where God shows off, my friends. The blemish is where the Spirit gets in. Where's your blemish? Where's your pain? And what could He do? What could He do if you'd offer it to Him? How could He transform it to bring hope, and comfort, and healing, and life, and light to others?